So, Sony came out swinging with a new announcement of the new Sony A9 Mark III. This camera is something that not the average person probably is going to be needing, but it's also something that's setting the tone of what the future of cameras will have thanks to Sony. Not only is this camera the most unreal pro camera for photography, but the coolest video specs in a camera right now, in my opinion. Let's talk a little bit of the amazing specs this camera holds for just $6,000. I know that price might seem very steep, but after the release of the A1 at $6,500 and this camera specs, I think that it's more than justified. Having a 24 megapixel full frame global shutter sensor in this camera is something that is just mind blowing. Now I know it's not the first kind of global shutter, sensor that I've seen or heard about, but something different that has come with this camera that's gonna make it stand out. Now you might be wondering, what the heck is global shutter? Well, in simplistic terms, it just means that all the pixels are read out simultaneously, which basically means that the image is obtained from the camera is just basically like a snapshot of a single point in time with the whole sensor, which essentially just causes zero distortion in the movement when you're capturing it. The wildest thing to me is that you can literally take 120 frames per second raw photos without blackout in this camera. Think of it as like a slow motion frame, and may I add that it can do all this while maintaining full autofocus. That's super fast and wild to me to think about, because in one camera like that, to do 120 frames per second with raw photos, which I think you can do about like a little bit more than 120, it's unreal to me, but that's just kind of wild to me to be able to get to do now inside a camera, since that is very hard to do if you think about what it had to be included in this camera. Which means that if you're basically a sport photographer, wildlife photographer, you're going to be quite set when it comes down to your photography. You're not gonna be kind of hoping that you missed a shot. You're basically going to be getting the shot more likely than not, because you're taking an unreal amount of photos that are raw with autofocus that, kind of make sure that you won't miss it. And speaking of autofocus, the great thing about it is gonna have all the cool new autofocus features that I've been seeing and everything. So you're pretty much gonna be set with that, and I'm sure it's gonna be better than what we expect it to be regardless. So that's just gonna be unreal to have if you're really needing to do a lot of frames per second. But not only just that, you got some unreal specs for video, which now I think is the perfect time to talk about some of those sweet video specs that honestly, they're quite mind-blowing to me. This camera can shoot 4K 120 frames per second, which sure, most of Sony cameras have been able to do that, but it can do all video modes without any crops of any sort, which is quite awesome to be honest, because you're able to really use your camera how it's supposed to be with a full frame sensor. You can also shoot up to 4K 60 frames per second from a 6K capture to have a crispy image, which for example, my Sony a7 IV has something similar, which shooting at 4K 24 frames per second always looks a lot nicer because it takes that, oversampling to make something just a lot smoother to the eye in my honest opinion, which sometimes I really love shooting with the 4K 24 frames per second on my Sony a7 IV for that reason. This also includes the options of 10-bit 422, the S-Cinetone profiles, and the 16-bit raw video output if you shoot with the HDMI option. And sure, these features can be found in most of Sony cameras, but with the photo specs of a camera like this, having some of those great video specs as well, just kind of pretty cool and exciting for what's to come with the future of cameras for not just the professional side, but I'm sure eventually for the more prosumer. Of course, you're gonna have the new 8-stop 5-axis in-body image stabilization that will allow you to take amazing stabilized videos. I have it on my Z1 essentially. It has a lot of more of those kind of like types of stabilization that you can shoot a lot more handheld. And if you pair it up with an OSS kind of type of lens, well, you're gonna be kind of pretty good to not have to need a gimbal essentially, which I mean, most cameras in the future I hope will have this because it's quite appreciated if you don't have to lug around a massive gimbal. And something that I am truly excited for Sony to keep going around is the awesome and fully articulated screen to make sure you can use to flip up or flip out when using the screen to capture things in any way, shape, or form that you might need when it comes down to your photography or videos. As you know, we get to do a lot of landscape and portraits, whether it's now photo or video. So having a good way to bring up the flip up screen or the flip out to shoot in every single way that you have, like how the Sony a7 R5 has, It's quite exciting because I'm hoping that they keep that going for even their more prosumer cameras, like when they come out with the A7 IV or the A7S IV or something along those lines, just because it's quite nice. But yeah, I know that this camera probably isn't for everyone due to its price point and everything, but to be honest, it's a win for the future in my eyes. This means that we will start seeing more and more camera companies pushing these technologies that eventually will start being able to be a part of the more prosumer cameras in the future. Maybe they won't necessarily have all that crazy specs, but it does mean that we're going to be having to bring their A+ and bring them better to the table, because more companies will have to do the same to compete. And that way we'll bring the price point to something nicer for everybody, because, well, you have competition, you have to consider that for the future for people to want to stay with your camera brand or switch over to it. So do you necessarily have to go buy this camera, or am I even going to be considering it? No, not anytime soon, but it is great to see in my eyes what they're coming with the new technology in these cameras. If I was a full-time sports photographer, maybe wildlife, or if I had myself a sugar mama that wanted to spoil me with this gift, then yes, I would honestly get this camera, because for the specs, for what you're getting, compared to cameras like, you know, like the A1 or anything, kind of doing pretty good. Because probably to me, I think that this is an unreal, like actual hybrid camera that is going to help push the limits for cameras going forward. And I'm quite excited for the future of what technology will be, you know, bringing out with each camera in the future, especially with all these cameras that Sony has been putting out. It's not catered to everybody all the time, but they have good amount of variety and the technology improvement for a decent amount of price. Look at the A7C Mark II, the ZV-E1, and things like that when it comes down to the specs to the price point. Just makes a lot of sense with what the future's entailing now with the AI, with the autofocus and things of that sort. So I want to leave a question to you. What do you think about this camera and Sony's announcement? Do you think this will be a big hit for Sony and it'll help them push the technology forward when it comes down to their cameras and maybe the other brands? Or is it something that's so niche that you don't think that'll be much of an impact? Would love to know your thoughts on that aspect, so make sure to comment down below on that. And as a bonus, Sony finally announced a firmware update for the Sony A1 and A7S III, which I guess all our bullying and, you know, push to kind of have them do a firmware update is paying off, which is kind of nice. I don't think it's nothing too crazy of a firmware update, but it just seems like it's a start, which I'm okay with that. So at least with that being said, it means that our campaigning of making meme videos of, you know, Sony releasing firmware updates for their cameras, slowly but surely paying off. So gotta thank the memes on that one just a little bit. But with all that said and done, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe, share this video with a friend. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.